This is the luxury world. Get inspired with us today and tomorrow. The Rolex Cosmograph Daytona is undoubtedly one of the most recognizable watches ever made, yet it has not always been that. One of the most sought-after watch models is the Rolex Daytona, which is well known around the world. Older Daytona models can fetch hundreds of thousands or even millions of pieces to be sold on the market. Since the Rolex Daytona is considered one of the ideal chronograph timepieces, most people likely think about it first and foremost when considering a chronograph wristwatch. In a nutshell, the Rolex Daytona has come to represent what a chronograph should be. The model has come to represent our perception of chronographs. All these elements demonstrate the Daytona model's enormous popularity and success. But why is the Rolex Daytona so well liked? Daytona's enormous popularity did not develop quickly. It's the reverse of what Daytona has gained through the years. In today's video brought to you by The Luxury World, we will go further into the history and tale of the Rolex Daytona and discover why it's currently becoming wildly popular. We will also share with you some things to think about if you're thinking of getting a Rolex Daytona this year or in the future. Make sure to subscribe to our channel right now if you haven't already, so you can keep up with all of our upcoming videos. This year, Rolex Daytona will celebrate its 60 years of existence. Think about that! The nearly 60-year-old model has sparked the same level of hysterical enthusiasm as it does right now. Yet, this represents a big win for the Crown this year. While we wait to see how the Crown celebrates this important anniversary, let's go back in time. Before the release of the Daytona, which was first signed simply Cosmograph without the Daytona designation, Rolex had been producing chronographs for decades. During the war, its triple-register chronographs were kept in oyster cases, and in the 1950s, the company began experimenting with watches that resembled the Daytona in design. When reference 6238 was introduced in 1962, it was simple to identify the genealogy of the world's most recognized chronograph, whereas reference 6234 had a more militarized design. Although the Rolex Daytona is one of the most well-known and famous watches, it had been through a lot of hard work and passion to achieve its popularity now. In actuality, the initial models of the Rolex Daytona were first referred to as Cosmograph, and later in 1962 received the designation Cosmograph Daytona. This was in 1963, a year after Rolex was named the Daytona International Speedway's official timekeeper. Since then, Rolex Daytona has crawled up the ladder of success and achieved the popularity it has been getting now. To give you a brief background of the Rolex Daytona and its journey, let us take a look at some of the biggest highlights of this timepiece. In 1963, the birth of Rolex Daytona coincided with the rise of the rock band The Beatles. At the time, the Rolex Daytona had a 36.5mm case, a modified manual Valjoux 72 movement, and cost somewhere around $200. Nevertheless, we'll start with the year when the term Daytona first appeared on the dial. A few years later, the Daytona would eventually gain the public's attention and begin to gain popularity. With a significant boost from Paul Newman, who made it his hallmark timepiece when he discovered a passion for motorsports, it was already attaining icon status by the 1970s. Since then, the Daytona has developed into a unique timepiece treasured by many famous personalities and figures all over the world. Rolex modified the internal movement and incorporated a Zenith El Primero automatic chronograph mechanism in 1988. Rolex also added crown guards, replaced the bezels from plastic with solid steel, and expanded the case's diameter to 40mm. Many people believe that Zenith's use of the El Primero movement in the watch was ultimately what kept the company alive, because they are known as Zenith Daytonas and are now quite collectible. The case of the watch increased to 40mm, where it is at this time. These Daytona Zenith models fetch high prices from collectors. Rolex replaced the Zenith movement with one of their own in the year 2000. The first in-house Rolex Daytona, the Daytona Reference 116520, is driven by the caliber 4130. With the development of new technology, Rolex also made subtle improvements. Fast forward after almost 2 decades, in 2016, Rolex released the Reference 116500LN, the first Daytona with its distinctive Cerachrom bezel. For 7 years, this Rolex steel Daytona reference hasn't changed. Since Rolex updated its GMT Master 2 and Submariner models with Cerachrome, a scratch and fade-resistant ceramic that gives these legendary mid-century models a 21st century flair, there has been growing anticipation for the new model of the Rolex Daytona. These days, there are so many different Daytona variants in existence that you can hardly shake a stick without striking one. In addition to the conventional oyster bracelet, a rubber strap is also offered. In addition to this, there are uncommon dial styles, limited edition watches with priceless stones inserted into the bezel, and more. The Rolex Daytona's worth before is different from what we see in the market today. Daytonas used to sell before they even reached the display case, which made it difficult for authorized dealers to sell them. But that's no longer the case. The biggest watch story of 2022 may have been the price drop of high-end watches like the Rolex Daytona, Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, and Patek Philippe 5711 following nearly 5 years of tremendous price growth. The cost of mint-conditioned current production peaked around March or April 2022. In Daytona, the 116500LN is offered for about 3 times the retail price. Even though no one can predict the future, the allusion to the year 2023 feels a little out of date because it's a significant year for the Rolex Daytona. Let us now talk about some of the Rolex Daytona models, shall we? Two-tone Daytonas will be the most economical model of Rolex Daytona. The Zenith Daytona 16520 and the fully in-house 116520 are both available, with prices ranging from $16,000 to $17,000. The original box, papers, and other items will cost more than normally if they're in decent shape. There are versions of pure steel 116520 starting around $20,000. Often, black dials cost a little less than white dials. Currently, the second-generation 116500LN starts to go for $26,000 on the secondary market if you decide to utilize a ceramic bezel. Here, the same dial pattern of white costing more than black is noticeable. Then chaos sets when we adopt vintage Daytonas based on the reference we mentioned earlier and precious metal versions in platinum, white gold, yellow gold, and rose gold, in addition to Eye of the Tiger designs, rainbow sapphire bezels, and meteorite dials. Production of Daytona oyster steel versions is currently underway. A 40mm variant with screw-down pushers and an oyster bracelet with a folding oyster lock safety clasp and an EasyLink comfort extender is the Rolex Daytona watch that was introduced in 2016. Now, how about the current market price forecast for Daytona? Rolex's Certified Pre-Owned or CPO program, which launched recently and permits authorized dealers to sell certified pre-owned Rolex watches that have undertaken brand evaluation and are at least 3 years old, as well as allowing customers to return their watches to the brand, is one of the most significant recent developments. The common consensus is that these CPO Rolexes, particularly the Daytonas, will cost far more than the industry average. However, it's still unknown how this will affect the secondary and gray markets. There was only one issue: Daytonas are hard to come by. The manufacturer normally distributes them in small quantities to dealers, who then save the few they can obtain for its most devoted clients, because they are considered an elitist timepiece rather than one for first-time buyers. This is a clear vision that the Rolex Daytona will remain to be one of the most coveted watches from Rolex and high-value timepieces in the market. Recapping what Rolex Daytona's greatest achievement so far will make you think that everything changed, or rather, everything changed quickly. It happened when a Paul Newman Daytona went up for sale at Philippe's in October 2017 in New York City. But this Paul Newman Daytona wasn't just any Paul Newman Daytona. It was the actor's personal Paul Newman Daytona with a distinctive case back. Everyone went insane at the time because the watch sold for $17 million, the highest amount ever paid for a wristwatch in history. Now, compared to the suggested retail price, the current Daytona watches attract significant premiums on the secondary market. This timepiece promotes a wise investment. Daytona is one of the most sought-after timepieces from the crown, as evidenced by the fact that it's virtually difficult to buy one at a retail store. This explains why, despite a price decline for some of its references, Daytonas still sell for twice what they should on the gray market. The Rolex Daytona's incredibly timeless design is one of the most crucial elements. Modern Daytona watches closely resemble the original Daytona models, and the early Daytona timepieces are more in demand than ever. From its early days as a timepiece for racing drivers to its current role as a status symbol for one of the most well-known actors in the world, the Rolex Daytona has gone a long way. Its balanced design, which combines form and function, will be improved in 21st century. With its anniversary this year, we still need to wait to see what the Rolex Daytona's future holds. But we are hopeful that this year will bring something fresh. What opinions do you have on the Rolex Daytona? Do you have any predictions for the possible Daytona this year? Please share your responses and viewpoints in the comment area. We would appreciate hearing from you. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. This is The Luxury World, and we hope to see you again in our upcoming videos.